LinkedIn presents.
I'm Rufus Griscom.
And I'm Caleb Bissinger.
And this is The Next Big Idea.
Today, Kara Swisher has been tech's best connected reporter for 30 years. What has she learned, and what keeps her up at night? I was out to dinner with a friend a few nights ago, and he asked what I was working on, and I told him I was getting ready to interview Kara Swisher. He said, "She's the podcaster, right?" And I nodded, and then he asked, "Is she the one who does those combative interviews?" That is what Kara is best known for these days. Her public interrogations of Silicon Valley's most powerful people. Interviews she conducts with an air of hostile impatience, like a principal giving out demerits. If you've listened to either of her hit podcasts, On with Kara Swisher or Pivot, then you know what I'm talking about. She's fair and funny, but you can't get anything by her. But there's another side to Kara, and this is what I told my friend. She was and remains a trailblazing journalist. She started writing about tech for the Washington Post all the way back in 1994. 3 years later, she moved to California and became the Wall Street Journal's very first internet reporter. At the time, an influential colleague sneered, "I guess you'll be covering CB radio." Not quite. Kara had a front row seat to the mesmerizing, often thrilling, sometimes embarrassing, dawn of the internet age. She also had unparalleled access to the people leading the way. Kara has known today's tech titans since they were practically in diapers. In fact, she's seen some of them in diapers. Stay tuned to this episode and you'll find out what I mean. She met the founders of Google when they were working out of a garage, Jeff Bezos when he still sold books, Mark Zuckerberg and Sam Altman when they were teenagers. Kara parlayed these relationships into big scoops. She used her enviable Rolodex to line up interviews for all things digital and code, the can't-miss conferences she'd co-founded with tech columnist Walt Mossberg. But along the way, her blunt, truth-at-all-costs style made her a few enemies. Elon Musk recently said, quote, "Kara Swisher's heart is filled with seething hate." Kara actually used that line as a blurb for her new memoir, Burnbook, a tech love story. It was just published, and it's why I know so much about her remarkable career. In the book, she dishes on the now legendary founders I just mentioned, writes about the evolution of her famous bullshit detector, and wrestles with the fact that the internet, which she watched go from punchline to miracle, increasingly resembles a dumpster fire of fake news and deepfakes, vitriol and privacy violations. We discuss all this and more in the conversation you're about to hear. And we began by talking about why Kara, who releases 4 podcast episodes a week, serves as editor-at-large of New York Magazine, appears regularly on CNN, and is raising 4 kids, 2 of them toddlers. Why did she choose this moment to write a memoir? The answer? Right after a quick break.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by Medtronic. Medtronic is dedicated to the pursuit of life-transforming health tech. From AI to robotics and beyond, we're reinventing what's possible, and we're just getting started. Visit Medtronic.com to learn more.
Kara Swisher, welcome to The Next Big Idea.
Thank you for having me.
So in the acknowledgments of your new memoir, Burnbook, you say that John Karp, he's the CEO of Simon & Schuster, is the only editor in existence who could have gotten you back into the book writing game.
He is indeed.
I want to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. What did he say to persuade you to write this book?
Besides the big check, which of course always works, a really big check, joking aside, one of the things that he did for me as a favor when he was he was just an editor. He was an up and coming editor for sure, but he was over at Random House in the Crown Books division. I had pitched a different book about the Haft family, which was a wealthy billionaire retail family. I'd been covering retail for the Washington Post. I had done a very good job chronicling this decline of this family, which was fighting with each other. It was like a King Lear-like story. And everyone was interested in it. It was like everyone was reading it in the Post, and it was sort of like Dallas. They had big hair. There was a gay son. There was an angry daughter. And there was all kinds of lawyers fighting over billions of dollars. And I went to see John, and he's like, I'm not interested in this book. And I was sort of like, really? Okay, what the fuck am I doing here? And he said, what are you doing now? And I said, I'm covering this small company called AOL. And this internet thing's going to be huge.
What is internet anyway?
Internet is that massive computer network,
Mm-hmm.
the one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. It's Allison. Can you explain what internet is?
And I started explaining it to him, and he goes, that's the book I want. And it was like, that was the biggest favor to me of anything, because he was super honest, and he was 100% right. And so over the years, he's written me, but never, which a lot of other publishers have come to me whenever there's, Yahoo is up or down, Marissa Mayer, or Google, want to write a Google book, write a Twitter book, write a crypto book, right? Whatever. And I was like, I have no fucking interest in this. I don't like these books. I think the news does a good job of it on a daily basis covering it. And so there had to be a bigger interest. And he wanted me to write this memoir all the time. And I didn't think I was ready. It was still fomenting, right? Things were still going on. And he was very patient. And he came to me at one point and said, why don't you do a fictional book about it, which I thought was kind of funny. I'm like, I can't write fiction. He's like, I'll hire you a fiction writer. You just tell them stories. And so John said that. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. But then I was like, no, I'm not interested in that. And then he said, you have to write a memoir. No one, Walt Mossberg hadn't done it. He had a memoir deal. And I thought, someone has to say what happened here. And I have to say, of the people around, there's only a couple of people who've done what I've done. I've seen it all. And I don't mean the whole computer age. I mean the internet age. And I knew these people. I did the most interviews with all of them. Mm-hmm. I spent the most time with all of them. I also have an opinion about them, how we got here. And then it started to sour. And that was like, okay, now I'm going to explain how we got here, where we are today.
Well, I'm glad he convinced you to finally do this book. Mm-hmm. It's funny. It's kind of gossipy. Mm-hmm. It's insightful. It's biting.
Well, it's a Burnbook. It's supposed to.
I have to confess, you'll probably dislike me for this, but I'm a huge fan of the podcasts. I used to read your column in the Times. Mm-hmm. I did not realize until I read this book what a journalistic trailblazer you were. I mean,
yes,
you
indeed.
like invented.
Why would I not like that? Yes, of course
you
I am.
Invented
I did.
The internet beat.
I did. There were a couple around. They just didn't stay.
So let's go back to the beginning then. What made you want to be a journalist?
Oh, gosh. I was a good writer, and I was a very curious person. I was very interested in people's stories, and I always think storytelling is the most powerful thing you can do. I think people operate in stories and themes and narratives. And, there's the old trope, which is history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes, right? And so I had spent a lot of time in college studying propaganda. I had studied communications, how it works. And I don't mean PR, I mean how people communicate with each other. I was very interested in both persuasion and manipulation of information. And wanting to be a journalist was just part of that process. I liked asking people questions. I liked entering people's lives and then leaving. I wanted to be in the military, which I write in the book. My dad was in the military. I was hoping to be a military analyst. I'm very interested in theories and plots and scenario building and stuff like that, which are all skills a journalist would have. I would have been a very good spy. I always tell people I really am one, and that's the longest con in history. But it's a similar set of skills.
Yeah. Cultivating sources, turning people off against each
getting
other.
People to tell you something, getting insight, finding out what happened was one of my interests. And, I'll be honest, I like the attention. I'm not a narcissist. I'm an egomaniac. That would be the way I would put it. But when I started writing in college, and I didn't write until college because I was the yearbook editor, but that's not really anything.
No, that doesn't count.
Just petty power over other high school students, which I wielded quite a lot. Not in a good way, in a benevolent way. But when I started writing for the school newspaper at the Hoya in Georgetown, I was good at it, like instantly. And, I wanted to be an architect and I wasn't good at it. I loved architecture, but I was untalented. When you know it, you're like, oh, I really can't do that. I'm not good. And I wanted to be the best. And it was very easy to be a journalist for me and people liked it. I got a lot of attention for it, which again, egomaniac, I like it. And I changed people's minds. I like that too. There was a power to it that I really enjoyed.
You've described yourself now twice as an egomaniac.
I'm teasing, but I am.
I would describe you as someone who is abnormally self-confident.
That is correct. But is that abnormal, or we all just teach people to hate themselves? You know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe.
I challenge you. I think we make people feel bad, especially women. Men too. But I have 3 sons. I have one who is just 2, so he doesn't really have. He's very confident. Let me just say, but he does. He walks through the world with a certain confidence that is interesting to me to watch. But I would say I am confident in the way people should be. I think a lot of people are taught to either hide their lights under bushels or they're not good enough. And this has to do sometimes with parenting, sometimes with schooling. And they don't take a good, strong look at themselves, and when they do look at themselves, the negative qualities, my face, look, I have a zit, instead of looking at beautiful eyes or whatever. And then of course the media works its ugliness on especially women, like this doesn't look good if you don't change this. I never was subject to that. I don't know why. I just was like, that's stupid. And there's an expression I like to use, which is I think the reason I'm confident is because I believe what I see. I don't see what I believe, if that makes sense. I'm like, I'm not good at that. I'm good at that. And I'm equally very clear about what I'm not good at, right? I am. I desperately wanted to be an architect. I assessed it, and I would not say I was good at it, right? And so I'm very okay with insulting myself, but I don't call it that way. I'm just being clear about what I'm good at and bad at, or things I like or don't like. And I don't think that's confidence. I think that's just the way people should be, and they're just not.
Yeah, that is interesting. It's interesting to hear you talk about your child, too, and to think about, do we enter this world with an innate level of confidence that somehow gets chipped away at us by, what society does? Yes,
I think the world does work its way on people, but I do think that people feel, and I think that has to do with how people are feeling in general about society, is they don't have control over anything, that everything is. And let me say, my dad died when I was 5. I knew I didn't have control. People are surprised when bad things happen. I'm not. That was it. I was like, okay, life is capricious. And then I was okay with it because I understood it more than most people.
Right.
So maybe that's why.
Right. Yeah. So for listeners, when your dad was 34, he had a brain aneurysm and died.
It was the formative thing of my life. And I don't think people reflect on what made them the way they are, but it certainly had... It certainly gave me certain skills. There's a lot of studies on this, which I've since read about people who lose a parent at a young age. And many people, and I would say my brothers are like this too, were highly functional. You become highly functional because the worst thing that ever happened to you happens to you and you survive. And then you're like, oh, okay. And then very little bothers me. I'm very hard to shake in a crisis, very hard to panic. I appropriately am scared of things that are scary, but otherwise, I'm not very scared of many things. I'm scared of the scary things.
Sure.
That's it. But I think other people put their own demons up before them often, and too often, fortunately.
I mean, this is somewhat trite, but do you think it also gives you an appreciation for the shortness of life?
100%. That's a theme throughout this book. Something I had very much in common with Steve Jobs. We talked about it quite a bit. We have a very short time, and it informs everything I do. If I don't like something, I leave. I'm like, nope, no harm, no foul. I just don't like it. Goodbye. You're taking up 10 minutes of my time I don't want. And mostly it's good things. I want to do this because I like it. But I do have a very deep sense of the ephemerality of everything.
So let's come back to the TikTok of the life and times of Kara Swisher. You discover this love of journalism when you're an undergrad at Georgetown. You end up getting a job at the Washington Post. And there's a key moment in your story that I want to zoom in on for a second. It's 1994. You get sent out to do an interview at a bland office park behind a strip mall in, I think it was called Tyson's Corner, Virginia.
Yes, Tyson's Corner.
And it's there that you meet Steve Case, who's the founder of AOL. Say more about that encounter.
Well, I had been covering retail with this family that I spoke about, and it just got exhausting. These people were such malignant narcissists. And so I wanted to change the beat. And the editor at the time was David Ignatius, who's now a columnist at the Washington Post. And so I was the young person. You know, I had worked my way up from an internship. So they're like, internet, computers, young person. That literally is how it happened. Like, and the others were like, what? Huh? And I'm like, oh, I kind of get it. A friend of mine who had been going out with taught me a little bit about it. And so they just literally sent me out there, drive out. I had a convertible Volkswagen Rabbit at the time. And so I went out there and met them. And I had been aware of the internet, but it was quite technical at the time and difficult and glitchy. And then I saw AOL and I was like, oh, I get it.
You've got mail.
And then Steve was such a vibrant young person he's now an old man. I just told him that the other day. We're both so old. He really understood it as a consumer product versus a geek thing. And that was unusual because a lot of it was geeky.
So you got back in your VW Rabbit and you drove back to the Post and you're like, this is it. I got to start. I'm the young person. I got to start covering this.
Yes.
You convinced David to let you do it.
He wanted me to.
He wanted you to.
What I had already been very interested in mobile phones. They had one at the Post, and I was using it all the time. And I kept going. And I'm very good.
And mobile is a misnomer in that case because it was like a briefcase, right?
It was at the time, and then it became that bigger one, the one that Gordon Gekko had in Wall Street.
Yeah, money never sleeps, pal.
And I had used some digital products when I was in the style section. The couplers that you had on a Trash 80. Do you remember the TRS 80? It was a little Radio
I'm 30.
Shack.
I don't even know what I don't even know what
it was.
A coupler
a little
is.
Computer, and there's two things you put on a phone. You remember a phone? You don't use phones anymore, but you put them on the sides of a phone, like a pay phone, which don't ask me what that is. But so you put them on, and then it would go, and it would send your story back to the Post. It was very unusual, and it was so ridiculous and onerous. But I used those. I used K-Pros, and it was just a hard time to be able to do it. But again, the minute the internet showed up, it was as if, you had a TV set, but not programming, right? Or not an antenna. And then all of a sudden, it all came together. And the minute you saw it, you could see where it was going. And I was really good at that. I was like, if this happens, then this. If classifieds become digitized, then the Washington Post has a business problem. I was very attuned to that because I'm a student of history and things get displaced. There was a very big business for horse and buggies, and then there wasn't. Like, I was always interested in those transitions.
Yeah, that cause and that technological cause and effect, yeah.
Right. And I was very aware that the people who ran horse and buggies never saw it coming, right? And then it was, oh, no one's going to drive a car. And I would just assess the thing. And the minute I realized that you could access information, and again, you're 30, we used to have encyclopedias. I grew up with the Encyclopedia Britannica, never changed. You went and looked at it. It was heavy. It was, card catalogs. Everything, you could look around and go, this will change, this will change, this will change. It made, if you had any kind of intelligence, you could do that. But a lot of people didn't. They liked their newspaper or their card catalog or whatever. And you could do that today, too. That's why I'm a proponent of the Apple Vision, because I think spatial computing is going to be a big thing.
Yeah. Or with AI, too. I mean, you hear sort of, it doesn't actually do that much. It's not going to get that much better. It's silly. It's, and yeah, exactly. You can be naive to it the same way people were to the internet or to the printing press or whatever.
It's not just that. It's that you don't have any imagination, right?
Sure.
Like when the iPhone came out. And I remember unwrapping it in a parking lot in Los Angeles, the iPhone. And when I saw that and the apps, I was like, he got it. He figured it out, right? They figured it out how to make it easy. Push a button, use it. Now, I wouldn't have imagined Uber from that.
Sure.
But if I sat there long enough, I probably could have. Why not? And so that's what I feel about AI. You don't know.
All right, so you start covering tech. 1997, you join the Wall Street Journal.
I do.
You become their first internet reporter.
They had some online people who were writing about these companies, but it was mostly covering Microsoft and chips and hardware.
Okay. They send you to San Francisco. What were your first impressions of Silicon Valley when you got out there?
My first impression was the Wall Street Journal office. People drank a lot. Actually, it was funny. They liked to party. Nobody had visited them. So my first impression was they were thrilled to have someone pay attention to them, whether it was at CNET with Halsey Minor or Jerry Yang at Yahoo or Mark Andreessen at Netscape. They were welcoming. They're like, oh, look, someone's paying attention to us. And then the money started pouring in because of the IPOs and stuff. And so then everyone paid attention because of the money.
And you write about this a little bit in the book. You know, the money starts pouring in. The sort of bromides about changing the world start getting turned up.
Exhausting. They believed them at the start.
Yeah.
Or they convinced themselves that's what they were doing. I thought it was bullshit the minute I heard it, but they definitely believed themselves. They lied to themselves really effectively.
Huh. And they lied to themselves, too, about, no, this isn't about capitalism. This is about, making the world a better place. Or, no, we don't have hierarchy. We just, Yeah.
Chief Yahoo. They had all these crazy names. It was so, one thing that struck me right away, and I was not old, I was in my 30s, was how juvenile they were. Like, they loved toys. They loved slides. They loved games, go-karts.
Yeah.
The food was juvenile. Like, it was, food is available anytime, and it's all cookies, like that kind of thing. And so that really struck me. And then you had this group of venture capitalists who treated them like they were children, right? Like anything they wanted, any bit of comfort.
The juvenile thing is interesting, too, because, I mean, on the one hand, these founders were quite young.
They were.
On the other hand, juvenile became sort of a stand-in for imaginative and creative and no rules and...
Right. Childlike is what they were going for. And then it was really childish. I do think there's an element of limitlessness that you need to have to be able to suspend disbelief. But they took it to ridiculous extremes, that they were somehow more special than anybody else and magical and magicians. They often referred to themselves as magicians. And, you know, alchemists used to be thought of as magicians, but they were just pharmacists, right? Or something, whatever. They just had a lot of tricks.
Snake oil salesmen.
Snake oil, yeah, exactly.
When we come back, Carol will tell the story of attending what may be the most ridiculous party in Silicon Valley's history. You don't want to miss this. Stick around.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by TIAA. In the last 100 years, we've seen financial markets swing, new currencies come and go, decades of savings lost in days, all showing that a retirement plan without a guarantee, quite simply, isn't enough. So more than a retirement plan, TIAA makes you a retirement promise. A promise of a guaranteed retirement paycheck for life. A promise that pays off. Learn more at TIAA.org/promisespayoff.
There are a lot of ridiculous extremes in the book. Maybe my favorite is the baby shower that you attended.
I almost thought about starting the book with the baby shower, but I didn't think people, and actually my editor wanted me to, and I thought, let's just save it. Let's just keep it. Let's have little delight everywhere throughout the book.
You got to tell listeners about this baby shower. This is for Sergey Brin, one of the founders of Google.
So one of the founders of Google was Sergey Brin. The other was Larry Page. And I had met them very early in the garage that Susan Wojcicki had, who later ran YouTube. And they were very puckish people. They were definitely different and odd and interesting. And I had been pushed to meet them by, I believe it was John Doerr and Mike Moritz, who had invested in them. And I had covered so many search companies, and they had all failed. They were like, these two are special. And I was like, all right, okay. You're smart people. You're putting a lot of money in them. And I went to meet them and had gotten to know them. And they were one of the big stories I wrote of. They were one, and they were sort of chaotic at the beginning. People don't remember chaos at Google was sort of the constant theme around that company. It was sort of what a wacky bunch of kooks, you know. And I often got invited to parties they would have or whoever, and I'd always go because you get so much insight. Whether you met, like at one party, I met Sergey's mom. I got a lot of insight into his character. His mom both his parents were serious scientists and somewhat grim Russians. And so they invited me to this baby shower that they had. And so I went to this because I very much liked Anne Wojcicki, who Sergey married. I thought she was interesting, super smart. She had been an analyst. And so you walked into this warehouse in San Francisco, and, I was used to going to very elaborate parties by this time. They'd started to hire different famous people, like Devo was at one. And I walked in, and there were pictures of them hanging from the ceiling, which was cute. I was like, oh, cute, baby pictures, how adorable. But when you got to the front, these people who they hire, they have all these people they always hire that run around, skitter around, and they wanted you to put on a costume. These people love costumes, by the way. I do not love costumes. And you had to either wear a diaper or you had footy pajamas, adult-sized footy pajamas, I think a rattle and a bottle. And then you had to go in dressed like that. That was the fun part of the evening. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? There's no way I'm putting on this stuff. No way. But people did because these were they were the rich people. It was like being in Louis XIV's court and everyone must dress as like peasants or whatever. And I would not do it. And I ran in. And the scene here was just insane. I thought it was crazy. And I've since made sure I fact-checked everything with Anne because she was like, oh, yeah, we did that. Oh, we did that. There was a jumpy, one of those jumpy things you get for kids.
Like a bouncy castle?
Bouncy castle.
Yeah.
Inside, there was a bouncy castle.
Nice.
Sergey was skating. It was roller skates, not blades, all around. All the food was like lollipops and soft food with baby spoons. Like they took this theme and went with it. And I was the only one not dressed in this stuff, except for Gavin Newsom, because he was smart enough to know I would fuck with him if he did.
And we should say quickly, Gavin Newsom at the time, the mayor of San Francisco.
Yeah. And he was going for bigger things. You could tell where he was headed.
Sure.
And the two of us were just like, are you fucking kidding me with this bullshit here? But It was funny to watch. It was sort of like you suddenly stumbled into a village, a remote people's village, and they had all these weird holidays.
Bizarre
customs. And so in the middle of it was a naked lady ice sculpture, big boobs, and out of the boob came white Russians. And you put your glass up and you got a white Russian. And the whole thing was just like the money. And at the same time, you're like, could you do not better than this? Like, is this where we're, I was like, if I had this much money, I would fly everyone to Hawaii and take over Lanai or something. But it was funny. And there was a series of parties like that. Google particularly had a lot of parties. They rented a boat once on the San Francisco Bay when Google Glass was coming in. And they took the boat out into the San Francisco Bay and rowed around while they were all wearing Google Glass. It was beautiful. Like, look out the friggin' window, people. This is the most beautiful setting, natural setting. And they were all talking to each other on Google Glass and setting them off.
Because if you say, hey, Google or something, the glasses turn on. And they were all turning each other's glasses on.
They were, and then nobody was talking to each other. They were all wearing it. And, Google was a particularly weird one. And Sergey, for example, at an Oscar party, which I don't think I put in, maybe I did, into the book, he was wearing them at an Oscar party, the Vanity Fair Oscar party. And he showed up, and there were celebrities everywhere. And I only went because I wanted to meet the celebrities. And he shows up with the glasses. And he's like, oh, can I talk to you? I'm like, no, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to celebrities. Like, get away from me. Go away. And of course, these celebrities do not want photos taken of them, surreptitiously. And he was like, what's the problem? I'm like, why are you wearing those? They think you're taking pictures of them. Don't do that. This is their party time. They just, want an Oscar. They don't want to have photographs. And this is really pre-social media. So he didn't get that. And so he's like, well, what do I talk to them about? And I was like, tell them you're a billionaire. That'll work with these people. Like, you're like that's an in for sure, because these are the most venal people on the planet. And, you'd be at things like that all the time. And it was funny at first. And then it was like, when are we growing up here? When's the grow up time happening?
Sure. And you're watching their power and their social influence and their cultural capital accrue and accrue and accrue. And yet the sophomoric behavior and the juvenile behavior is, it's
and
frozen.
And it got rancid. When you're that rich for that long and you have so much comfort and everyone around you is being paid by you, very few people can resist that.
Yeah.
And I think when you see it, you're very struck in a good way, unless you started off as an adult. Like, Tim Cook never behaved like that. Like Steve Jobs didn't really behave like that. He just didn't. That was not part of the repertoire. But I think if you start off at, say, 19 years old, and several of them I met Sam Altman when he was 19, I think. Mark Andreessen was in his early 20s. Mark Zuckerberg was in his he must have been even lesser than that when I met him. I think what happens is you get so wealthy and you're right a lot of the time that you think you're right all the time. And then people around you tell you how right you are. And so if you don't have a very strong character, you think you're a god in a weird way.
Well, speaking of the sort of ego and godlike belief, you have a metric in the book that you call the prick to productivity ratio.
Yeah.
Explain what that is.
Well, I shouldn't let people off for being pricks, but ultimately, there's a lot of pricks. So what are you going to do? So what I had is, I have a tolerance. I don't have a big tolerance for people who act like pricks, but if they're really productive, I give them a little out. Like, okay, you did deliver the iPhone to us. That was pretty good, Steve Jobs. I'm going to take off some points from you acting like a jerk. Although by comparison today, he was not at all. Right now, he looks like just a grumpy old man, essentially. So I just give people an out. I kind of do a score. Like, if you're really productive, you can be a little more of a prick. It's just a joke. It was a joke I used to just do all the time. And I used to sit there and go, okay, they did this. This is bad, but wow, they did this. And so, because I love inventions and I love some of the things they invented.
Okay, so Steve Jobs has a pretty good prick to productivity ratio in your book. Let me ask you about it. Let me get you some others. Mark Zuckerberg.
He's not a prick, actually. And he certainly is productive, but some of the things he did are prickish, if that makes sense, right? His lack of foresight into the impact Facebook would have, his lack of interest in what could happen. That, to me, was really problematic. I think a lot of it was born by treating him like he was a kid, but he wasn't. He had enormous power, and he knew how to wield it, right? And he made a lot of mistakes and wouldn't own up to them. Even this last apology, which, of course, I appreciated on some level.
Going to go back to the hearing where Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, is questioning Mark Zuckerberg.
Let me ask you this. There's families of victims here today. Have you apologized to the victims? Would you like to do so now? Well, they're here. You're on national television. Would you like now to apologize to the victims who have been harmed by your product? Show them the pictures.
If you look at the language, it's, I'm sorry for what happened to you. Listen to what he's saying. He's not saying, I'm sorry for what I did. If you have children, you know that trick. I'm sorry for what happened to the window. I was like, what about you breaking it? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
it's not full accountability, no.
Oh, no. It's actually an aggressive way.
In a way.
It's a dodge. You're trying not to say, I did this. And so they often use the term unintended consequences. And I said they're not unthinkable, right? They weren't unimaginable consequences. And they're not interested in the consequences in any way. And they don't want to pay for the consequences. We have to pay for them. And so that's very prickish. He's actually a nice man. He can be dismissive with people. I know that. They're all like that, right? But of the many people, I think he tries very hard to be a regular guy. He's not a regular guy, but he tries to be, which is somewhat sweet in some ways. I just think the first column I wrote for the New York Times was called The Expensive Education of Mark Zuckerberg. And I wasn't talking about him paying. I'm talking about us paying for him on this learning curve that we're still on. We're still subject to what he decides, but he doesn't pay the price, we do. And so I just want him to pay the price, that's all.
But it's also, as nice as he is, I mean, I don't know, but there is a level of naivete, right? I mean, you talk about his
I don't think it's naive. I don't think it is.
But you talk about his kind of Cliff's Notes understanding of history and philosophy,
That's correct.
And that colors his sloppy behavior around sort of free speech on the platform so I do think there is, maybe lack of education, naivete, I don't know what the right word is, but now he's wised up, I guess.
Of course he has. And so what we tend to do, and this is what, getting back to the juvenilization, it's like, well, he didn't know. I'm like, now he knows. What's he going to do, right? When are we going to treat him? At one point, when Sheryl Sandberg was brought in, she was called adult supervision. That's how they like to do it. They like to talk about different executives coming in as adults, as if they're not adults. But they are adults, right? And at one point, they were saying something about Mark like that. And I was like, he has 2 children. He is an adult. Stop treating him like he's not. Or, Elon Musk with his recent boob tweet. Like, fine. But he's 52. Come on. He's 52. That's sad, right? He has to make a boob joke at 52 and everyone around him has to laugh at it because he's paying the bill. Oof. Is that a grim way to think about your life, right? And that's the kind of thing. And I think that's what I'm talking about, this pass for people that other people don't get. Men and women, by the way. If you make a boob joke at the office, and you don't get to do that, right? Nor should you, by the way. You can make it with your friends. Again, it's not a question of being humorless. It's that you get to do this and you pay nothing for that. And others do. And that to me is really kind of ridiculous. You get to act like a child. And
you get frozen, I think, in the mind of the culture at the time you become famous, right? So I think for so many people, they still think of Mark Zuckerberg as the character in The Social Network, not the Mark Zuckerberg of today.
He's not like that guy.
Let's do another prick to productivity. You mentioned him, Elon Musk.
Yes, the man of the hour. Of all hours, except for Trump. We get to pick between the 2 jackasses. Honestly.
What's his prick to productivity ratio?
Well, it was good for a while because he did. One of the things that attracted me to Elon when I met him very early on when he was doing X.com, and it was a competitor to PayPal. They were quite competitive, and then they merged. And he was just like all the others. Like I was like, oh, look, another one of them, right? Interesting. He was from South Africa. That was interesting. But there were a lot of immigrants in Silicon Valley. When he started doing, after he made that money at PayPal when they sold it to eBay, the rest of them did kind of stuff that you'd expect, right? Made the investments. But he started doing cars and space, which was really unusual. There was nobody doing that. And it was easy to see why people liked him, right? He was quite, brainy. He was quite performative even then. Like, he was building an image of himself as sort of Iron Man. And it was interesting. Like, nobody did that. And it was challenging and kind of substantive. And so he was a very compelling figure. You saw glimmers of what's happening now. You saw juvenile behavior, like, or more comments than behavior. I didn't socialize with him, but, dumb jokes, dumb memes, which I don't care. Like, fine, if that's what amuses you, go right ahead. Ha, 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 look at this picture. I get a lot of that.
You do host a podcast with Scott Galloway, so you have a high tolerance for dumb jokes.
I have a high tip, but exactly. That's exactly right. And so, it wasn't cute. It just was like, oh, all right, fine, I'll look at it. But he was doing things that were substantive, like really, truly. And so we had him after Steve Jobs died. We hadn't had him at a code conference. We had him there talking about these things. I was like, people will find this guy interesting. And I got to tell you, the whole room was electric when he was talking about all the different things. And every man in the room had a man crush on him instantly. They were like, oh, I want to be Elon Musk. But he was interesting. He just was. Yeah. And this interview set people talking about him. And then he sort of lived that, right? Really interesting, swashbuckly kind of personality. But you started to see edges around it. The racial discrimination lawsuits, which were not uncommon in Silicon Valley, but they were there. You started to see during COVID, he and I had an interview where he threatened to leave the interview when he was fighting back against the man who was trying to shut down his factories. You saw the drama when he was saying, I have to sleep on the factory floor. I did an interview with him right after that. He was clearly having mental issues, right? Like depression. I don't know what it was, but he was very dramatic about, and he started to say things like, if I don't succeed, humanity is doomed. And at first you're like, ha, ha, ha. And then you're like, oh, you really think that? Like, but he did, And so you'd see glimmers of strangeness, right? Strangeness or godlike behavior. And then during COVID, something happened. I'm not sure what, like something.
Something snapped.
A lot of people. Yes, a lot of people. It's not a new thing. Like a lot of people got radicalized in a lot of ways. And that's how I would characterize it. And obviously you've read the stories in the journal about his use of ketamine and he's in the New York Times he talked about being bipolar. I think it was self-diagnosed. It was clearly something was off, right? Like and he wasn't getting the help he needed because everyone around him made money from him, right? Like it sort of felt very Howard Hughes. I think Ben Mesrick, who's written, he wrote The Social Network, the book that was The Social Network was based on. he really characterized it for me. I always thought he thought himself as a godlike, because that's the way he used to talk to you. Like, I will fix it. I shall.
Sure.
Very Trumpian. But Ben really has it nailed, which is he thinks he at one point when we were doing an interview, he thought he kept saying we were in a simulation, or there's a non-zero chance we're in a people in Silicon Valley like this idea that we're in a video game of future teens, or we're just a video game. I think it's interesting. It's a funny, interesting thing
to think
about.
exercise.
Yeah, whatever. Maybe. Who knows? And so when he was doing that, that was super interesting. But then you start to realize he thinks this, and he's ready player one. He's player one. So everything else doesn't matter. And then I was like, oh, of course. No one matters. That's how he can be so casually cruel. That's how he can be such a pig. That's how he can promote homophobic, transphobic, all these things, because he thinks he's playing a game, right? And it doesn't excuse him by any measure, but something snapped. And I think it had to do with COVID. I think it had to do with this drug use that had been well chronicled, which I'd heard about for a long time. And this idea that he's the smartest and most important person on planet Earth, which he is not.
Okay, last prick to productivity.
Yeah, okay.
Kara Swisher.
I think I have some prickish tendencies. People are surprised that I'm a lot nicer. I don't know why people have. I think it's a little sexist. It's like, because I ask tough questions, but I don't think they're unfair. So I don't think that's prickish. I think that's honest. I think I'm very productive. I've started all these companies. I've tried new things, podcasting 10 years ago, right? This was before it was big. Started all these, independent media companies, which everyone's doing now, whether it's on Substack or wherever. Always tried to challenge myself. And I do think one thing that I tried really hard with this book was, I think it's fair. And it's I'm also saying, this is what I think. You can think differently.
One person's opinion.
This is my opinion. And I think when people read it, they'll be like, probably she's nailed it pretty well. That's what I was trying really hard to do. So I think I have a very good prick to productivity ratio.
Coming up, we talk about how rubbing shoulders with tech royalty has shaped how Kara sees the world. She also tells me the one billionaire she thinks deserves all of our praise and admiration. We'll be right back. I want to quickly tell you about the Next Big Idea Club's BookBox subscription. Every quarter, we get our friends Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, Susan Cain, and Daniel Pink to pick the 2 best new works of nonfiction. And then we send them to our subscribers. If you sign up, you'll also get access to beautiful audio and video e-courses, invitations to exclusive AMAs with top authors, membership in our LinkedIn community, and VIP access to our live events. Plus, you'll be helping us continue to make this show. So if this is at all interesting to you, go to nextbigideaclub.com, learn more, and if you do end up subscribing, use the promo code PODCAST at checkout to get 20% off. That's nextbigideaclub.com, promo code PODCAST. Do you ever think you're too tough? Are there ever moments where you're like, I think I should have been easier on that person?
No.
No,
I think I'm not tough enough. I think I'm actually got a soft spot.
You think you're not tough enough? Interesting.
I think that these people are the most powerful people on earth, and they have unlimited power, unlimited wealth, lack of accountability. I think it's appropriate to be tough on them. Why does one person get to decide our social media? Why does one person get to decide? I think to me, when I had heard about the Ukraine thing before, Elon had geofenced this certain area of Crimea, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, what? Like, huh? Like, you're kidding me. And look, our government doesn't always function perfectly, but to have one person who's unaccountable and unelected, I'm like, no. Like, that can't happen. And again, what I really get struck by, and I don't think I'm tough enough, is they're constantly dunking and constantly bringing down our society. Like, if you look at anyone on any one day on Twitter with some of these fellas, and they're all fellas, let me say, 2 things they do, which is really striking. Nothing's ever good. Everybody sucks, right? Everybody sucks. This government doesn't do this. The school system in San Francisco is this. Everything is. And I know better. That's the other part. I know more than you do when you actually don't know, right? So really, like, they're ignorant and arrogant at the same time. That drives me crazy. And I'm like, do your fucking homework and like maybe understand that life is a little more complex. The other thing they do, which drives me nuts, is they themselves have benefited enormously from, say, the government. Elon, good example. Loans.
Right. Huge loan during
loans. It saved
during
his
the
company.
Obama administration. Yeah.
Coming to this country, you got to come to a democratic country from your country and make a fortune. The internet was paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. Mm-hmm. And the lack of gratefulness, and I'm not one of these people. There used to be a restaurant, it's called Grateful or something, where you had to go say what you're grateful for before you ordered, and I would never go in there. That sounds like
your least favorite restaurant of
Oh my God. I was like, fuck you. I just give me the food. I give you money, you give me the food. Like, I didn't say that.
You would rather wear a baby onesie,
that is correct,
than have to go to Grateful, the restaurant.
That's correct. But it was called something like that. And I was like, that's just obnoxious to make you say something. And I get their point, but I'm not eating there. But the lack of graciousness and gratefulness for where they are in society just, and it reached. The example I had that when that guy got killed, Bob Lee, who was an entrepreneur, he gets killed in downtown San Francisco in an area, if you know San Francisco, was not crime-ridden. There wasn't a lot of crime. He gets killed, and instantly, every one of these fuckers, these guys, started to blame homelessness and crime in San Francisco. Now, turned out to be this guy was in a group of people who like to do recreational drugs, and it was the brother of a woman he was seeing, right? That's exactly what I thought it was, right? It was something like that, some version of that. But instantly, without any knowledge, they had to trash San Francisco. And I was like, San Francisco has its problems, but you're making shit up because you're such an unpleasant person. And the idea, you know, the whole clarion cry, I'm getting all worked up here, but they're always like, fight the man. Fight the man. Like, the man is out to get you. You're the fucking man.
Right.
You're the man. Are you kidding me? The richest people in the world are acting like victims. Drives me nuts.
Do you ever worry about them rubbing off on you? I mean, you spend a lot of time with these people.
The good things have.
Such as?
Risk-taking. I really admire that. The questioning of things. Why do we do it this way? I love that. In a good way, I think it can be really productive. Entrepreneurship at its heart and innovation at its heart is a beautiful thing and can free people. And that I love. But when it becomes sort of wealthy people dictating people, it's the same old shit since the beginning of time, right? And that I don't like. And that's what, unfortunately, not to everybody, by the way. There's some really wonderful people in tech who are doing very innovative things. But I prefer the startups and the fresh and the new. And it's a great thing about our country. And that's what we should be encouraging, and not the constant adoration of wealthy people, unless it's Taylor Swift, and then she deserves it.
All right. Well, now you know what to say when you go to Gratitude the restaurant.
Yeah, I love Taylor Swift. She's so great.
Kara Swisher, it's been a real treat to talk with you today.
Thank you so much, Caleb. What a good interview. I really appreciate it.
Kara Swisher's new memoir, Burnbook, A Tech Love Story, is out now. Grab a copy wherever books are sold. Just be careful if you buy it on Amazon. Don't buy the AI-generated knockoff. Apparently there is one of those. This episode was written, edited, and hosted by me, Caleb Bissinger. Sound design by Mike Toda. Rufus Griscom is our executive producer. We're grateful for the team at the LinkedIn Podcast Network. See you next week.